Santa Ana is sort of a tale of two cities. Here in downtown Santa Ana, you have the Ronald Reagan Federal Building and Courthouse and other city and county buildings as the backdrop for really these very iconic and historic city streets with all the different shops and stores and street vendors of all sorts that speak to the Latino culture and heritage of this community. Unfortunately, you also have as a backdrop of these same city streets the crime, the violence, the gang warfare, the shootings, the subsequent police confrontations over the years. Now, back in 2020, in the summer, after the police killing of George Floyd, thousands of Santa Ana protesters took to these same streets to voice their anger and their opposition to what they have been claiming is police abuse in this city, there, Santa Ana. Santa Ana, California, population almost 350,000. About 80% of the people living in Santa Ana are Latino, and almost 20% of the population is without health insurance. The average income per person here is less than $25,000 a year, and nearly 20% of this population lives in what the U.S. Census Bureau considers poverty. According to census data, where there is poverty, there is crime, particularly in many cities with disadvantaged neighborhoods like Santa Ana. The FBI's own violent crime statistics cite Santa Ana as a high crime rate community, with about 1 in every 230 people the victim of a violent crime, such as armed robbery, aggravated assault, or murder, for example. Now, in the last few years, nonviolent crimes have been on the decline in Santa Ana, lowering the total amount of crime stats throughout the city. However, that is no consolation for proud Santa Ana residents like Sandra Pochapena and many others who live in this urban Orange County city and worry about crime and their own safety. Although Sandra Pochapena believes there is another problem, the policing in this city.
Armed police don't need to respond to every call for service. There are some calls for service that really should not involve somebody with a weapon showing up.
Pochapena knows that for decades, the Santa Ana Police Department has been mired in controversy. Investigative news reports from the Los Angeles Times, Orange County Register, and Voice of OC have documented this controversy over the years. Everything from excessive police abuse and misconduct to racial profiling and questionable killings, some of which resulted in civil rights violations and lawsuits. So as Pochapena explains, there is legitimate cause for concern. Currently, Pochapena is a neighborhood representative for Pacific Park Eastside in Santa Ana, the neighborhood she lives in. Pochapena's roots run deep in the city. She is a Historic Resources Commissioner with the city and the former chair of the Arts and Culture Commission. These days, as a rep for Pacific Park Eastside, Pochapena is focused on helping guide the development of Santa Ana's South Main Street community in a way that she says celebrates the history of this neighborhood and keeps the area from becoming a gentrified mess. Over the years, South Main Street has had its fair share of crime. Today, Pochapena spends much of each week trying to combat that crime on a community, grassroots level, and that involves everything from trying to identify crime hotspots and drug dealings to graffiti hotspots and illegal trash dumping. All this in an effort to keep her neighborhood a safe and healthy place for residents.
The environment is such that there's a lot of illicit activities in certain areas, so that compromises, our safety sometimes. We've been photographed by, some dealers, and sometimes there's like drug paraphernalia that is left discarded, so that's a hazard for our children, our families, and it just doesn't encourage people to want to spend time outdoors or to get exercise. Or if we see like big clusters of folks that might be injecting or using illicit substances in a very public area along a right-of-way, it doesn't really help create that healthy environment that we want for our families and our children.
Pochapena says she and her fellow neighbors must be hypervigilant and proactive in trying to safeguard their community. As Pochapena explained, she has concerns with her city's police department and the cop versus community mentality, as she describes. And while she acknowledges things have gotten somewhat better in recent years, she still questions whether she and other Santa Ana residents can rely on the police to act responsibly to keep them safe.
The George Floyd incident was a real cathartic flashpoint for our nation at large. I think it triggered a lot of rage that was present already in the community, a lot of frustration to be expressed, especially by our youth. We've had a very problematic history in Santa Ana with our law enforcement, buildup of decades of police abuse and lack of professionalism and just ineptness, lack of community ties and compassion, I think really built up such a level of resentment and rage that, so many youth came out to the streets, and a lot of youth in Santa Ana came out during a pandemic, risking their lives to express their rage and frustration with the system.
Pochapena believes in police reform and says here in Santa Ana that begins with accountability and cops taking personal responsibility. And if that does not happen, she says city residents must be their own voice, their own advocate.
I'm a big believer in police oversight and litigation. Sometimes the only way you can really address endemic issues in an institution is by forming another body like a police oversight commission, or when that is not effective or one does not exist, then it's very important that we educate our population to know that litigation is a very viable option.
The unique thing about Santa Ana is that it is one of the most Mexican, and I do mean like Mexican-American, large cities in the United States. So it had this very dramatic shift in demographics in the 1980s, whereby the kind of conservative Orange County that a lot of America is familiar with transitioned into this majority minority community that is basically the face of a changing California. So
Manuel Joseph Escamilla is a local Santa Ana historian. Until recently, Manny Escamilla lived in Santa Ana his entire life and worked for the city for nearly 15 years. Now an urban planner in the city of Oakland, Escamilla has documented decades of historical Santa Ana events, including a chronology of policing in the city. Escamilla says the checkered past of the police department is not a recent phenomenon. He believes the controversy and what he describes as unethical behavior of the Santa Ana PD was a progression of incidents over the past century.
The modern police force, as you kind of see it today, was much more a result of the 1920s, 1910s efforts. So you kind of have this long history of the Santa Ana PD being around for a while. But it was a police department that really served the interest of those with power, right? So like police departments across the country tend to serve those who have the most amount of political influence, and in the city of Santa Ana in particular, it was really agricultural interests. So going into not even ranchers, but farmers, the citrus industry. There was a lot of kind of early strife in the 1930s around the what was known as the Orange County Citrus War. So that's where you kind of see like this early model of antagonism between minority communities, in that case the majority Mexican laborers that were working in the citrus industry, also against local sheriffs and local police departments that were used essentially as union busters.
Escamilla says this narrative of what he terms police versus minorities in Santa Ana was further advanced in the mid-1900s as the Hispanic community of Santa Ana increased dramatically, and the police department increased its rank-and-file white police recruits.
Right around the 1950s and 60s, what you see as a major kind of national conversation around Santa Ana's structural inequalities was with the John Birch Society. So the John Birch Society was this very anti-communist, extremely right-wing organization. And they had a very strong base within the Santa Ana Police Department. So many of the members of the Santa Ana Police were members of the John Birch Society, and they actively undermined the influence of their police chief. So there was this kind of entire controversy that occurred there with kind of these runaway factions within the PD. and it really strained community relations, right? So this is the point in which Orange County is very anti-communist, extremely conservative politically, and you had no Mexican Americans, no African Americans, no Asians on the police force.
Fast forward to the 1990s, when Escamilla was a youngster in his city of Santa Ana. Escamilla explains that, for him, the 90s were one of several launching points for the conflicts witnessed with the police and the minority Santa Ana population that have carried over to today.
At least for me in my own lived experience, is like understanding the 1990s war on drugs and this kind of extreme militarization that you see with police basically looking to combat street violence. So, Santa Ana in the 1990s had rising homicide rates. We're looking at, multiple shootings per week, if not every night in particular communities. The homicide rate was amongst the highest of any large city in the United States.
As Escamilla explains, the soaring crime rate in Santa Ana in the 90s was very concerning to city residents who basically were insisting that the police department add additional resources to quell the violence in the streets. Escamilla says the police reacted in a way that both helped and hindered the city.
To strike a fair balance is that there was a massive push from the community to also kind of lower the amount of street violence that was going on, specifically within inter-gang rivalries. So that gave the SAPD a very strong it's a base of support from the community, very directly from the community, not even at like political levels, but just community support for SAPD's tactics if they were seen to be working. So that's where there, even within my own lifetime, there's kind of this balance that you have to strike between making sure to have proactive policing that does in fact reduce levels of violent crime, but at the same time kind of respecting the communities that they're out there supposed to serve.
Escamilla claims he knows from personal experience how the Santa Ana Police Department, as he says, both defended and in part destroyed the city in trying to strike that balance.
I have two cousins, one of them whose her life was saved by SAPD during essentially what was a kidnapping that occurred here in Santa Ana, at gunpoint after work, right over on 17th at the Walgreens on 17th and Grand. But on the other hand, SAPD's I think it was like their SWAT team and their anti-gang unit, essentially raided my childhood home on multiple occasions looking for my cousin, right? And so that was another experience where, one of my very first childhood interactions with the SAPD was looking at a shotgun at 7 o'clock in the morning during a police raid. So, and then just seeing the destruction that was created within my own house, where basically every room was ransacked, no apologies. It was basically just looking for one person in an entire extended family unit living there. And those types of experiences do color the way that you see the police department.
We met with Santa Ana Police Chief David Valentin for an exclusive one-on-one interview to discuss some of the issues that many Santa Ana residents, like Sandra Pochapena and Manny Escamilla, have been concerned about. We discussed everything from public trust and racial profiling to a police oversight committee and the police union. Should there or should there not be a police oversight committee, maybe a citizen committee, if for at the very least to have better accountability, more personal responsibility from your officers?
So police oversight is obviously, again, one of those topics that's being discussed broadly across the country. I belong to various executive police forums that really research this area. And so not only is it a focus area interest of mine, but I want to see what best practices are out there in our country. And usually what you've seen, at least in the Southwest and in California, police oversight is implemented following some major incident or incidents. For example, in the city of Oakland, they have a very robust oversight commission with investigatory and subpoena power. Why is that? They had an unfortunate period in their history where officers were committing broad-based crimes in uniform on duty. And so that is very different than our reality here in Santa Ana. We have not had broad-based police corruption. Now, having said that, is there value to taking transparency to the next level? And that's really what police oversight is. I believe there is. I believe there is. So long as it's tempered, measured, and purposeful. It cannot we can't get into, a witch hunt perspective. We can't get into this assumption that all officers, engage in alleged misconduct, because that's simply not the case.
Chief, is there enough transparency with your department here in this city? Sometimes, sadly, the department loses in the court of public opinion because when you talk to folks on the street, they seem to believe that they're sort of not in the know, that there's things going on here that they don't know about, and it gives the perception that, you used the word earlier, corruption or something wrong is happening. Could you be more transparent? Is there a way you could let the public know a bit more about what's happening in their own backyard?
It's a focus of ours. And so, for example, on our website, I want to make sure that it's timely, it's updated. Nothing worse than going to a department website and it's old, it's stale information. We have information on there about critical incidents, officer-involved shooting data, and we also have the investigative protocol process on officer-involved shootings and in custody deaths. It's an area that people have a lot of questions about, and we are the only agency in Orange County that has that forward-facing on our website. It answers a lot of questions for folks.
So let's really clarify even further. So to be clear, Chief, what can you tell the public and what can you not tell the public? I think that would give some sort of knowledge of, that will give information for your citizenry here in Santa Ana.
Sure, great question. So there's, from my perspective as a chief, there's really three areas that we have to ensure that we protect, and maybe eventually you can provide additional information, but three areas. The first is any current criminal investigation. We can't share that information because of concerns of the people involved. Any administrative investigation. So when an officer is accused of alleged misconduct, that investigation, the contents of it, are confidential to that employee. And then anything having to do with tactics.
Many of us realize that there are problems with law enforcement and reform is obviously necessary.
Vicente Sarmiento is the mayor of Santa Ana and has been part of the city council for about 15 years. Mayor Sarmiento has lived his life in Santa Ana and has dedicated much of that life to helping give back to his community. And part of that leadership involves having a safe city, working with both residents and police officers, as well as other law enforcement agencies and even the criminal justice system, like prosecutors and judges, for example, to achieve that goal. The mayor acknowledges that there are problems with his city's police department. However, he, like so many other Americans, also knows that the majority of officers are good and brave people who put their lives on the line every day to protect the lives of others. Mayor Sarmiento and the council have been discussing the various possibilities of having a police department oversight commission, and the city is having conversations about the best practices for implementing this process. For years, community activists, advocacy organizations, and Santa Ana residents have demanded the establishment of a police department oversight commission due to the decades of policing controversy. And while Mayor Sarmiento believes a commission could help his city and improve policy and procedure at the Santa Ana Police Department, he also believes SAPD should not be constantly demonized like so many critics of the department have done in the past, because he claims Santa Ana is not like other cities that have been all over the news recently due to bad policing.
Our community is very different than, other communities that have different challenges. So we want to have something that's tailored to our needs. For us, I don't think that we're Minneapolis. I don't think that we're, some of the cities that are going through some, extensive trouble with policing. Nonetheless, we've had plenty of incidents that are problematic. So to the extent that we can take a look at things now, make some improvements, have a citizens review, commission where these are people and members of the public that are, able to comment and opine and make recommendations and maybe take some, have some autonomy as well. But it's important that we include the public because these are their public dollars that are going towards policing efforts, and there should be some direct nexus between those who are being served and those who are serving.
Sarmiento explains what he believes his community is most concerned about regarding the Santa Ana Police Department.
I think like any other community, abuse of authority, excessive force used when there is contacts between the police and the public. Obviously, civil rights being infringed upon, and a lot of unfortunately payouts when there are wrongful death cases, and the loss of funding that goes towards that, and really the image that the city has, in addition to just having people who are working families, people of color feeling comfortable in their community, making sure that there's dignity and respect both ways, towards law enforcement and law enforcement towards those families that we have in the city. So I think I've always noticed is, people here in Santa Ana are willing to pay even a premium for that professional care, for that ability to be able to treat everyone with respect. And for me, as a person of color, as a father of color, I think all of us want to be able to not have to have a talk with our boys, our sons. Those are things that are very difficult for me as a father to know that, many other fathers in the city have to have these same conversations that we really shouldn't have to, because it's a reality. We know that encounters can turn violent, they can turn dangerous. And so we equip, young men with abilities to be able to lower the volume and try to prevent those encounters from going more serious and dangerous. But those are conversations I hope that one day will go away if we can make improvements to the way law enforcement interacts with communities like Santa Ana's.
The minority Latino population here in Santa Ana is definitely a force to be reckoned with. A great example, Mayor Sarmiento, who you just heard in the field report, so many of his colleagues, Latino colleagues, are on the City Council, the County Board of Supervisors, other county government offices, political offices, and many of the Latinos here really lead the way with the economic and business development in this city. And yet, with all that said, and despite the brave and heroic work of so many police officers in this city to keep Santa Ana safe, there are still too many residents who believe the policing in this city is still a work in progress, a progress to be determined.
As the world came together in 2020 to fight a global pandemic, many communities united to battle another widespread plague, racial injustice. Headline after headline demonstrated the inequities experienced by people of color, and the topic moved to the forefront of this country's national conversation. To bring financial resources to those in Orange County fighting for justice, Tammy Tumbling, Executive Vice President and COO of the Orange County Community Foundation, founded the African American Alliance Fund.
The African American Alliance Fund was started on Juneteenth of 2020, and it was started because the African Americans needed help right then. During the unrest with the loss of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, I was standing in front of my television trying to figure out what is it that I can do to help. But I had to look inward first. And in order to figure out what I could do, I had to know what are my skills, what are my gifts, and it's philanthropy.
In her role as Executive VP and COO, Tumbling helps local philanthropists impact the communities they love. Last year, she decided it was her turn to make an impact. Her initial $25,000 quickly grew to almost $400,000 to raise awareness about systemic racism in and around Orange County.
Over the 1 year that we've been in existence, we've allocated over $131,000 to 15 organizations. We have supported organizations like the NAACP, the Green Foundation, Council of African American Parents, Bridge Builder Foundation, Forgiving for Living. All of these organizations are important to us. And the reason they're important is because they focus on health, human services, civic engagement, education, and economic business development. That's how we're going to help the Black communities thrive, is by giving and supporting the grassroots communities through these type of programs.
Well, we were a part of the inaugural part of the African American Alliance Fund. They put out a petition asking individuals to apply. And of course, we were very excited, one, because it was a new fund, and also to be able to help the program that we've had for 8 years, Community Health Advocates, where it is of young adults who are mostly college age or 18 and older to learn how to advocate for themselves. So with this funding, we're able to support interns on a weekly or monthly basis. Funding for interns, sometimes that's hard to come by. So we're very grateful to the African American Alliance Fund and of course the OCCF being a part of it.
In addition to the Green Foundation, grants to 14 other community organizations were also given in 2021, including the Institute of Black Intellectuals, who's creating an enterprise map of Black-owned businesses and nonprofit organizations in Orange County. Support was also given to Forgotten Children Incorporated, who provide outreach and assist victims of human trafficking throughout the Orange County region. Tumbling's connection to Orange County dates back to her last year of high school. She attended La Habra High while living in Compton, commuting 3 hours by bus and by foot each day.
What makes the African American Alliance Fund so special to me is growing up in the inner city as a single mom by the age of 16 and then becoming the guardian to my brothers and sisters by the age of 19. I had so many people in the community who helped me to thrive and helped my family to thrive, from neighbors, teachers. I remember even working at my sister's high school for free. It was a Catholic school and they charged to be there, but they allowed me to be a volunteer just to pay my sister's tuition. I never had to pay for that. But that was because there were people there that believed in me. There were people there that believed in my family. And sometimes your friends, they are your family.
The African American Alliance Fund and its family of grantees are equipping and empowering Orange County's Black communities and building a better OC for all.
In order for us to ensure that Black communities thrive, we all need to be informed. And it's not about race, socioeconomic status, gender. It's not about any of those things. It's about humanity. And it's about making sure that we provide education through the African American Alliance Fund and raise awareness of social injustices and racial inequities. It's about educating everyone because we're in this together.